The hardest part of attending my husband, Mark's, memorial wasn't the grief. It was knowing he was alive and watching me from less than a mile away. I sat there in the front pew, wearing the black dress he'd always said he loved, and I stared at the oversized, polished mahogany casket at the front of the room. It was empty. Of course, it was empty. The scent of white lilies was so thick it made my head swim. I've always hated lilies. They smell like bitterness and decay. But my best friend, Chloe, had insisted on them. She said they represented purity and restored innocence. She was sitting on the other side of the empty space Mark left, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Every few minutes, she'd reach over and squeeze my hand, her own hand trembling, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading for comfort. And sitting right next to me, silent and stiff as a statue, was Sarah, the other wife. We had never met before 3 days ago, but sitting there, we were bound by a secret so dark and heavy it felt like it had its own gravity. We were the only two people in that room, aside from the traitors, who knew the truth, that Mark wasn't gone. He was just gone from us. We were all playing our parts in his grand finale. Chloe was playing the devastated best friend. I was playing the grieving widow. And Mark was playing God, watching his own creation from afar, waiting to collect his $2 million. It's funny, the things you miss, not the grand gestures, but the quiet moments. Our life before, it was built on those quiet moments. Mark and I had been married for 15 years. 15 years of Sunday mornings, with him making pancakes always slightly burned around the edges. Just how I liked them and me reading sections of the paper aloud. The house we lived in, we'd bought it when it was barely standing. We rebuilt it with our own hands. I remembered the smell of sawdust and fresh paint. The way Mark's hands, usually so rough from his contracting work, could be so gentle when he'd rub the paint smudge off my cheek. He was my rock. That's what I told everyone. When my mother passed, Mark handled everything. He held me when I broke down, and he was the one who found the words for her eulogy when I had none. He had this deep, steady voice that made you believe everything was going to be okay. And then there was Chloe, my Chloe. We'd met in college, and she'd attached herself to my hip and never left. She was the sister I never had. When Mark came into the picture, it wasn't a competition. It was an expansion. We became a trio. Chloe was at our house more than her own. She and Mark would tease me, ganging up on me about my terrible taste in movies. Or we'd all sit on the porch, drinking cheap wine and planning the future. She was the first person I called when I got my promotion. She was the one who held my hair back when I had food poisoning. And when Mark's business started to struggle last year, she was the one who brought over groceries and pretended it was just too much for her to eat alone. That financial stress, it had been heavy. Mark was worried. I knew he was. He started working late, taking calls at odd hours. He seemed distant, his brow always furrowed. I'd rub his shoulders at night, trying to work the tension out of him. It's just a rough patch, baby, I'd whisper to him. We've been through worse. We're a team. He'd turn and kiss my forehead, that familiar, warm smile returning to his face. But his eyes looked right through me. You're right, Evie, we're a team. I'm just trying to make sure if anything ever happened to me, you'd be sad. You and Chloe both. I'd laugh at him then. Don't be so morbid. Nothing is happening to you. You're stuck with us. He just held me tighter. I just love you so much. He'd whispered. It was only a week after that conversation that he bought the boat. Pause. A shift in tone. He called it the Escape. A small, used fishing boat. He said he needed a hobby, something to clear his head. He said the ocean was the only place his phone didn't ring, the only place the bills and the stress couldn't find him. I supported it. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted my old Mark back. I never realized the escape wasn't just the name of the boat. It was the name of his plan. The morning he disappeared, the air was heavy, one of those thick, humid summer mornings where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just suffocate you. Mark kissed me goodbye before dawn. I was half asleep, buried under the comforter. I remember the scratch of his beard and the smell of coffee on his breath. Going out early, baby, he mumbled against my hair. Want to catch the tide. Don't wait up. Be safe, I murmured, not even opening my eyes. Love you more, he said. It was our ritual. The next time I heard anything, it was 8 p.m. And it wasn't Mark. It was the Coast Guard. The world didn't shatter. It just dissolved. It went from solid to liquid, and I couldn't get my footing. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing blue lights in my driveway, of neighbors peering through their curtains, and the acrid smell of burnt coffee in my own kitchen as a kind police officer tried to make me a cup. Chloe was there in an instant. She burst through the door, her face a mask of pale horror, and just held me. She was the one who spoke to the officers, her voice sharp and efficient, while I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a quilt, staring at the phone. He was just late. He'd lost track of time. His phone battery died. But the Coast Guard officer, a young man with eyes far too old for his face, was gentle. Ma'am, he said, kneeling in front of me. We found fragments, a life vest, part of the hull. It looks like he hit a submerged shipping container. It happens. It's fast. He wouldn't have known. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt cold. I looked over at Chloe, who was weeping into her hands, her shoulders shaking. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching this happen to someone else. I should be the one crying. Why wasn't I crying? The next 3 days were a fog. The search continued, but the officers' tone grew more and more somber. They called it a recovery mission, not a rescue. And that's when the first small, jagged piece of suspicion lodged itself in my heart. The police needed a statement. Detective Reynolds, a woman with a no-nonsense haircut and a gaze that missed nothing, sat across from me at my own dining room table. Chloe sat beside me, her hand gripping mine under the table. A silent pillar of support. Double quotes Mrs. Harris. The detective said, her voice flat, your husband, did he have any enemies? Anyone who might wish him harm? I almost laughed. Mark. No, everyone loved Mark. He was the kindest man I knew. And his business, she pressed, clicking her pen. You mentioned it was struggling. It was a rough patch, I said, repeating my own words. But we were fine. We were handling it. Chloe squeezed my hand. Evie, tell her. I looked at Chloe, confused. Tell her what? About the life insurance? Chloe whispered, her eyes shining with unused tears. About how he wanted to make sure you were safe. I turned back to the detective. He'd just increased his life insurance a few months ago. He was worried about the business, and he said if anything ever happened, he wanted me to be set. Detective Reynolds just looked at me. That clicking pen paused. It was the first time I felt it, that shift in the air. The moment I went from grieving wife to person of interest. Increased it by how much, Mrs. Harris? I'm not sure. 2 million, I think. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Chloe seemed to hold her breath. $2 million? The detective repeated. Not a question, a statement. And you are the sole beneficiary? Yes, I assume so. Mark handled the finances. And you? The detective turned her sharp gaze to Chloe. You were aware of this policy. Chloe pulled her hand back from mine, as if scalded. Me? No, I mean yes. Mark mentioned it. He said he was worried about both of us. Evie's his wife. I'm her best friend. He always said we were his family. He just wanted us taken care of. Detective Reynolds wrote something down. I see. The moment she left, the investigation changed. It was no longer a search for a lost husband. It was a hunt for a culprit, and I was the one holding the motive. The whisper started. Neighbors I'd known for decades suddenly couldn't meet my eye. The local news ran a story about the struggling contractor and the multi-million-dollar policy. My grief was now a performance, and no one was buying my innocence. I was alone, except for Chloe. She was my shadow. She cooked, she cleaned, she fielded the calls from reporters. Don't listen to them. Evie, she'd say, her voice fierce, rubbing my back as I stared out the window, willing Mark's boat to appear on the horizon. We know the truth. You loved him. He loved you. Why did he buy that boat? Chloe, I whispered one night, the dread finally coiling in my stomach. We needed money. Why would he buy a boat? He was stressed. Baby, she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt a little too tight. Men do stupid things when they're stressed. He was trying to find a way out. He picked the wrong one. He was trying to find a way out. Her words echoed in my head long after she went to sleep in our guest room. The body was found 5 days later, or rather, what was left of it. The ocean is not kind, it was. Identified by dental records. The Coast Guard officer came back, his hat in his hands. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Harris. The case was closed. The suspicion on me evaporated, replaced by a wave of pity and casseroles. The whispers turned from she did it to that poor woman. My grief was complicated. I was mourning the man I loved, but I was also mourning the life I'd been accused of destroying. And underneath it all, that tiny, jagged piece of doubt. It didn't go away. Why did Mark, a man who meticulously saved receipts for tax write-offs, not tell me the final details of a $2 million policy? Why had he been so insistent on his hobby? And why, when I went through his desk looking for the insurance paperwork, did I find a receipt from a jewelry store for a diamond bracelet I had never seen? It was dated 3 days before he died. That receipt, it was a tear in the fabric of my grief. A tiny, insignificant piece of thermal paper, folded small, tucked inside the warranty booklet for his desktop computer. J. Adore Jewelers, 114K gold tennis bracelet, diamond, 3 trillion. It wasn't a small purchase. It was significant, expensive, the kind of gift you give for an anniversary. Our anniversary wasn't for 4 months. I sat on the floor of his office, the smell of leather and old paper all around me, and I tried to make it make sense. Maybe it was an early gift for me. Maybe he was holding on to it. But Mark was terrible at keeping secrets. If he'd bought me something that expensive, he would have been vibrating with the need to tell me. I searched our closet, my jewelry box, his sock drawer, nothing. I put the receipt in my pocket. The crinkle of the paper is small. Sharp sound in the stillness. Chloe was in the kitchen, on the phone. Her voice was low and serious. I paused in the hallway, listening. It has to be handled delicately, she was saying. No, she's a mess, of course. She's not in any state to deal with the paperwork. I'll make sure it's expedited. Yes, I have the file. A cold stillness washed over me. What file? What paperwork? She hung up and walked into the living room, her face set in a mask of exhausted sympathy. Oh, Evie, honey, you're up. She came over, trying to herd me back to the sofa. You should be resting. Who was that? Chloe. Her eyes flickered. Just a fraction. The insurance company, just trying to get a head start. I know it's awful, but the bills aren't going to stop, and Mark would have wanted me to handle it, I said, my voice sounding flat and unfamiliar to my own ears. Of course, baby, she said, her tone softening, becoming that cloying, comforting syrup I was beginning to hate. But you're grieving. You shouldn't have to think about policy numbers and death certificates. Let me take this one thing off your plate. I'm your best friend. This is what I'm here for. She reached for the files on the dining room table, Mark's files, which I had organized. No, I said. She froze, her hand hovering. What? No, I'll do it. I need to do it. It's the last thing I can do for him. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. It wasn't about doing something for him. It was about finding out what he'd done. Chloe watched me. Her head tilted. A long, calculating look passed over her face before it softened back into concern. Evie, you're not thinking straight. It's complicated. You're emotional. I am his wife, I said, and the words felt like armor. I will handle it. I took the files. I locked myself in the office, and I started to dig. I wasn't a detective. I was just a woman who knew her husband's habits. I knew he had a private email for his business ventures. The one he said was just for invoices and boring contractor stuff. I found the password in his old leather wallet, written on a scrap of paper tucked behind his expired driver's license. Escape one. My blood ran cold. I opened the email, and the world I thought I knew fell away. It wasn't just invoices. It was a life, a whole other life. There were emails to a travel agent, booking to one-way, first-class tickets to Costa Rica, departing 3 days from now. The names on the tickets weren't ours. Michael and Claire. There were bank transfers, small amounts at first, then larger, draining his business account into an offshore entity I'd never heard of. And then I found the folder labeled contingency. Inside were photos, not of me, not of a stock photos of Mark, very much alive, on a beach. He was laughing, holding a drink, his arm slung round Chloe. But this wasn't my Chloe. This wasn't supportive best friend Chloe. This was Chloe in a string bikini, her head thrown back in laughter, kissing him, kissing my husband. The pictures were recent. The date stamp was from 2 months ago, from a business trip he'd supposedly taken to Miami. And there, on her wrist, glinting in the sunshine, a 14K gold, 3-carat diamond tennis bracelet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I think, on some level, I stopped breathing. I just sat there, staring at the screen, at the proof of the ultimate betrayal. The boat wasn't an accident. It was an exit. The insurance policy wasn't for me. It was their seed money. He died so they could be reborn, rich and free, on my grief. He hadn't just faked his death. He'd faked our entire life. And my best friend. She'd held my hand and helped me plan his funeral while she was packing her bags to meet him. The grief I'd been faking suddenly became real. But it wasn't for Mark. It was for the 15 years I'd just lost. The 15 years I'd been a fool. The sound of the front door opening made me jump. Chloe. She was back from running an errand. Evie? She called out, her voice bright. I brought you some soup. I closed the laptop, my hand shaking. The chill in my veins turned to ice. Then, slowly, it began to burn. If they wanted a performance, they were about to get one. But I wasn't going to be the only one in the audience. I clicked on one more file in that contingency folder. It was a list of names. My name was at the top, but there was another, one I didn't recognize, with a note beside it, Sarah J. Loose end. Handle before payout. Who was Sarah J? I found her, an old business partner. Apparently, I found her address in his contacts. She lived one town over. A loose end. Well, I was about to go tie that loose end into a knot. I left the house an hour later. Chloe was busy in the kitchen, humming to the radio, heating up that soup. The sound of her humming, that normal, everyday sound. It was grotesque. I'm going out. Chloe, I called, my voice surprisingly steady. I tucked the jewelry receipt into my shoe. I need air. I need to clear my head. She popped her head around the corner, her face a perfect portrait of concern. Oh, okay, honey. Do you want me to come with you? No, I said, a little too sharply. I softened my tone. No, I need to be alone, just for a little while to process. Of course, she said, nodding, her eyes full of that false pity. Take your time. Call me if you need me. I will. I lied. I drove. I didn't cry. I was too cold for tears. My mind was working, clicking through details with a terrible, mechanical clarity. The tickets, the offshore account, the bracelet. Sarah J. Loose end. Sarah J. lived in a small, tidy bungalow in a neighboring town. The kind with wind chimes on the porch and perfectly manic _year petunias. It took me 20 minutes to get there. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the house. Who was she? Another victim, a co-conspirator, a loose and sounded like someone who knew too much, someone who was owed something. I walked up the path, the wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. I rang the bell. The woman who answered was ordinary. She looked to be in her late 40s. Like me, she had kind eyes, tired eyes, and was wiping her hands on an apron covered in flour. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice warmed. My carefully prepared words evaporated. I just stood there, the jewelry receipt burning in my shoe, the betrayal sitting like a stone in my stomach. I think my husband knew your husband. It came out as a desperate jumble. Her brow furrowed. I'm sorry, I'm not married. Not anymore. My ex-husband, David, passed away 6 months ago. A new kind of cold trickled down my spine. Oh, I said, I'm so sorry. My husband, he just passed too. Her eyes softened with a genuine, shared grief. Oh, you poor thing. Please, come in. You look like you've seen a ghost. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. She poured me a cup of tea, her hand steady. My name is Evie Harris, I said. My husband was Mark Harris. Her hand, holding the sugar bowl, froze. She didn't drop it, but the tremor was unmistakable. Mark Harris, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. You're Mark Harris's wife. Yes. She sat down heavily in a chair opposite me. The color drained from her face. My God, she breathed. I read about the accident. The boat. I'm so sorry. He wasn't your husband. I said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. Was he? No, she said, staring at her hands. My ex-husband was David Miller. So how did you know Mark? I pressed. My voice gentle. Sarah looked up, and the shared grief in her eyes was gone, replaced by something hard. Mark was David's business partner, or so he said. David, my David, he was like Mark, a contractor, good with his hands, to trusting. She took a deep breath. 6 months ago, David went on a hunting trip. Up in the mountains, there was an accident. A fall, it was. Quick, they said. Oh, Sarah, I whispered, the parallel chilling me to the bone. He had a life insurance policy. She continued, her voice flat. A new one, $1 million. He'd been so proud of it. Said he was working with this new partner, Mark, on a big development deal. and the insurance was just collateral. A smart business move. Let me guess, I said. When you tried to collect, it was gone, she whispered. The policy was real, but the beneficiary had been changed 2 days before his accident. Changed to a corporate entity I'd never heard of, an LLC. When I tried to fight it, the lawyers, they were brutal. They said David had used the policy to secure a business loan. They produced paperwork. It was his signature. It all looked legal. And Mark, I asked. He disappeared, she said, her eyes flashing with a sudden, hot anger. He was the one who found David's body. He was the one who came to my house, right where you're sitting, and told me David was gone. He held my hand. He cried with me. He called my David his best friend. And then he vanished. The development deal, the LLC, the money, all of it gone. And I was left with a mortgage I couldn't pay and nothing, a loose end, I said, the words slipping out of me. Sarah's head snapped up. What did you say? I reached into my shoe. I pulled out the crumpled receipt. I found this in his desk. She looked at the name on the receipt. Jayadore Jewelers. Her face went white. He didn't just take the money. She choked out. A single, hot tear rolling down her cheek. My David, he had a ring. My grandmother's ring. He was having it reset for our daughter's birthday. At that store, Mark offered to pick it up for him, to save him the trip. He hadn't just stolen her money. He'd stolen her memories. He'd stolen her best friend. Double quote Sarah. I said, my voice sharp. My husband's new policy. It was $2 million. Ours was $1 million, she said. He faked his death. I said, the words tasting like poison. He's not dead, Sarah. He's in Costa Rica, or he's on his way with my best friend, and they are waiting for my $2 million payout. I told her everything. The email, the tickets, the photos, the bracelet. Chloe, she listened, her face transforming from that of a grieving victim to a woman made of steel. He conned us, she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage that matched my own. He used us. He used your friend to help him, and he used my David. He didn't just use your David, Sarah, I said, the full, sickening truth dawning on me. A fall, an accident, a man who was his partner, who trusted him. Mark found him. We stared at each other. We didn't need to say the word murder. The memorial service, I said, my plan forming, cold and clear. It's tomorrow. He'll want to see it. He's a narcissist. He'll want to watch us grieve. Watch us what? Sarah said, confused. He won't be there, but he'll be watching. And Chloe will be my shadow, making sure I'm playing my part, making sure I sign that insurance claim. So what are we going to do? Sarah asked, wiping the tear from her face. Her jaw set. You said you're not married anymore, I said, looking her straight in the eye. But you're a widow. You know how to grieve. How do you feel about wearing black? The plan wasn't complicated. It wasn't about fireworks or a dramatic, movie-style confrontation. We weren't actresses. We were just two women who had been pushed too far. The plan was simple. We were going to tell the truth, but we were going to do it on our terms. We spent that night in Sarah's tidy bungalow, not sleeping, just preparing. She brought out a box of David's old files. It was full of paperwork for their failed business, all of it co-signed by Mark. Look at this, she said, her finger tracing Mark's flamboyant signature. He had David sign over collateral, his tools, the truck, even this house. If David hadn't fallen, Mark would have owned everything anyway. The insurance was just the cherry on top for my accident. He didn't need a signature. I said, the words cold. He had my best friend. She had access to everything. My signature, my passwords. He'd been siphoning us dry for a year, and Chloe was the one telling me to stop nagging him about the finances. We found a laptop. We found a small, portable printer. Sarah was methodical. She printed the bank statements from the offshore account. She printed the emails with the travel agent. She printed the photos of Mark and Chloe on the beach, the sun shining on their skin. The diamond bracelet on Chloe's wrist like a shackle. We laid them all out on her dining room table. Our evidence, our grief. What about the police? Sarah asked, her voice quiet in the pre-dawn light. I thought of Detective Reynolds, her sharp, suspicious eyes. She suspected me, I said. She'll listen to us now, but not yet. Not first. They need to feel safe. They need to believe they've won. They need to be watching when their world falls apart. We do this in public, at the memorial. How do we know he'll be watching? He's a narcissist. Sarah, I said, he needs to see it. He needs to see me broken. He needs to see Chloe play the hero. It's the final act. I remembered the contingency folder. He was meticulous. He wouldn't leave his own funeral to chance. Chloe will be streaming it for him on her phone or a laptop. She'll have a private feed set up just for him. We arrived at the funeral home an hour early. Sarah wore a simple, dignified black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked exactly what she was, a widow. I walked in first. The scent of those hated lilies hit me like a physical blow. The room was already half full. Neighbors, friends, people who had whispered about me 5 days ago and were now here to pet my hand. And then I saw Chloe. She was at the front, by the casket, adjusting a flower arrangement. She was wearing a stunning, tailored black suit, her blonde hair in a perfect, sleek bun. She looked like the CEO of grief. She saw me and her face crumpled, her eyes welling with instant, practiced tears. Oh, Evie. She rushed over, arms outstretched for a hug. I let her hug me. I let my body remain stiff and cold in her embrace. I could feel the tension in her. She was holding me, but she was also managing me, placing me in the front row, exactly where I was supposed to be. I'm so glad you're here, she whispered, her voice thick. He would have loved this. Where will you be? I asked, my own voice a broken whisper. Right here, she said, squeezing my shoulder. I'll be right on the other side of the aisle with my parents. I'm not leaving your side, she gestured, and I saw her purse on the seat, propped up right next to it. So subtle most wouldn't notice was her phone. It was angled perfectly toward the front pew and the podium. The screen was dark, but I knew it was recording. It's starting soon, she said, giving me one last, pathetic look. Be strong, Evie. I nodded. I sat down in the front pew, my back straight. The organ began to play a low, mournful tune. And then, just as the service was about to begin, the side door of the chapel opened. Chloe looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Sarah walked in. She walked slowly, her head held high, and came directly to the front. She didn't look at Chloe. She didn't look at the casket. She looked right at me. And then she sat down, right next to me. I could feel Chloe's stare from across the aisle. It was a tangible thing, a spike of pure, unadulterated confusion and fear. I heard her phone vibrate. A text, no doubt. Who is that? I reached over and took Sarah's hand. We sat together, two widows, united in our loss and in our revenge. The memorial was about to begin. The guests were all here, and somewhere, less than a mile away, in a motel room or a rented car, my husband was settling in to watch the show. Good, I thought, gripping Sarah's hand. I hoped he had a comfortable seat. The funeral director, A man with a professionally somber face stood up. He spoke in that practiced, syrupy tone, talking about a life cut tragically short and a man who loved the sea. I wasn't listening to him. I was watching Chloe dot from across the aisle. She was vibrating with tension. She had stopped dabbing at her eyes. She was staring hard at the side of my face, willing me to look at her. Then her gaze would flick to Sarah, then back to me. Her phone, the one on her purse, was live. I could see the small, red recording icon from across the room. Good, I thought. He's watching. He's seeing her panic dot she was texting, her thumbs moving furiously under the cover of her purse. Who is she? Get her out. What is she doing? The messages were probably frantic. I just stared ahead at the empty casket, at the mountain of lilies. I kept my hand firmly clasped with Sarah's. We were an island of two, and now, the funeral director said, closing his binder, we'd like to invite his beloved wife, Evie Harris, to come up and share a few words of remembrance. There was a collective sigh from the room, the moment of peak grief, the widow's speech. I stood up, and I pulled Sarah up with me. Our hands were still linked. We walked together to the podium. A confused murmur rippled through the pews. I saw Chloe go rigid, her hand freezing on her phone. Her eyes were wide, not with grief, but with sheer, unadulterated shock. I stood at the podium. Sarah stood just beside me, a silent, powerful witness. I didn't have to look at Chloe's phone. I could feel its electronic gaze. I was speaking to the room, but I was performing for an audience of one. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice clear and calm. It didn't tremble. My husband, Mark, was a man who believed in planning. He was meticulous. He left nothing to chance. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. He planned our life, the house we built, the business we ran. He planned for my future. He was so worried. He took out a $2 million life insurance policy just to make sure I'd be okay if anything ever happened to him. I heard a few soft ahs from the crowd. Pity. But I wasn't the first person he planned for. I continued, my voice never changing pitch. I turned and looked at Sarah. This is Sarah Miller. Her husband, David, was Mark's business partner. 6 months ago, David died in a hunting accident. The silence in the room was no longer sad. It was sharp. Chloe was half out of her seat. Evie, she hissed, her voice a stage whisper. What are you doing? This isn't the time. This is exactly the time. Chloe, I said, my gaze finally locking on her, and I watched the blood drain from her face. I turned back to the room. I held up the first printed page. It was the photo of Mark and Chloe laughing on the beach. Mark was so meticulous. He even planned his escape. He just needed a new partner, someone who knew my schedule, someone who knew my passwords, someone like my best friend, Chloe. The gasps were audible now. People were turning in their seats to stare at Chloe, who looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Mark isn't in that casket, I said, pointing to the polished wood. He's alive. He's waiting in a motel room somewhere, watching this on a live stream, waiting for me to sign the insurance papers. The $2 million that was supposed to be my future, it was their retirement plan. She's lost her mind, Chloe shrieked, finally standing up. She's in shock, grief. She's delirious. Am I said. I held up the next piece of paper, the bank transfer. Am I delirious? Or is this the offshore account you both opened? Is this the diamond bracelet? The one he was wearing in this photo? The one he bought with the money he stole from Sarah's husband? Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and shaking with a cold fury. My husband trusted him, Mark. He found my husband's body, and then he stole his ring, his mother's ring. He stole our money, and he stole our memories. And he left me to lose my home. The room was in chaos. The whispers had turned to low, angry rumbles. Evie, stop this, Chloe screamed, and she lunged not for me, but for her phone. She was trying to cut the feed, trying to warn him, but I was faster. I lived with her for 15 years. I knew her moves. I grabbed the phone from her purse, my hand closing over it, and I looked right into the camera, right into my husband's eyes. "You're a coward, Mark," I said, my voice quiet. But I knew the microphone on the phone was picking up every word. "You weren't man enough to ask for a divorce. You weren't smart enough to get away with it. You conscripted my best friend. You may have murdered Sarah's husband, and you thought we would just grieve. You thought we were that weak." I held up my other hand, showing him my own phone. "Already dialing. The police are on their way. Mark, they've been listening to all of it. This isn't a memorial. It's a confession. And we," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand again, "are the witnesses." Chloe let out a sound, a guttural, animal sound of pure panic. She turned, not toward me, but toward the exit. She ran. She knocked over a stand of those god-awful lilies, and the smell of them, of decay and bitterness, filled the room as she fled. The show was over. The moment Chloe ran, the silence in the chapel broke. It was like a dam bursting. People were shouting, standing on the pews to see. The funeral director was fluttering his hands, babbling about respect and decorum. I just stood there, breathing. I felt light. The 15-year weight of Mark's love, which had become a 15-day weight of his betrayal, was just gone. I looked at Sarah. Her hand was still in mine, and it was rock-steady. And then, through the double doors at the back, came Detective Reynolds. She wasn't in her sharp suit. She was in her tactical vest, two uniformed officers flanking her. She'd been outside the whole time. She didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes found me at the podium. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Evie Harris," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Thank you for your statement. We'll take it from here." The officers didn't go for me. One went straight to the phone. I was still holding Mark's live feed. The other went to the podium and took the stack of printed evidence from Sarah. "We have a team apprehending Mr. Harris at the Red Roof and off the highway," Reynolds said, loud enough for the room to hear. "And Miss Thorne," Chloe's last name, which I realized I hadn't thought about in years, "won't make it to the airport. The exits are covered." She had believed me the moment Sarah and I had walked into her office 2 hours before the memorial. She hadn't just believed us, she had acted. She'd seen the suspicion in me, but she'd also seen the truth in Sarah's old, cold case. Our plan wasn't just to expose Mark. It was to pin him. The aftermath. It was not clean. It was a long, grinding, miserable year. Mark was caught in that motel room. His suitcase half-packed, the laptop still open to the frozen, disconnected live stream. Chloe was picked up on the interstate, her car full of cash and designer bags, the diamond bracelet still on her wrist. The trial was a circus. The local news, which had once painted me as a potential suspect, now painted me as a scorned wife turned avenging hero. I hated it. I wasn't a hero. I was just a woman who had finally opened her eyes. Mark's lawyers tried to paint him as a desperate man, a victim of Chloe's manipulation. Chloe's lawyers tried to paint her as a lovesick fool, brainwashed by Mark. They turned on each other like scorpions in a bottle. Mark's charm, the warmth that I had loved, looked grotesque under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. It was oily, manipulative. He'd weep on the stand, talking about the pressure and how much he loved Evie, I felt nothing. It was like watching a stranger read a bad script. Chloe's betrayal was, in the end, the one that cut the deepest. But seeing her on the stand, her lies unraveling, her concerned friend mask replaced by her cold, spiteful anger, I didn't feel rage. I just felt pity. What a small, hollow life she must have had to want to steal mine. The worst part was David's case. The investigation was reopened. It was no longer an accident. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark's phone records, the timing, the convenience. He was found guilty, not just for the fraud, for the conspiracy, but for the murder of David Miller. Life without parole. Chloe got 20 years. Accessory, conspiracy, fraud. I sat with Sarah every single day in the front row. We never spoke to the press. We just sat to silent witnesses to the slow, grinding machinery of justice. When the verdict was read, I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just felt Sarah's hand find mine, and I squeezed it. I sold the house. I couldn't be in it. The smell of sawdust and paint, the memory of him making pancakes. It was all tainted. It wasn't my memory. It was a set piece from his long con. I let the bank take it, and I walked away with my clothes and my mother's photographs. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. It has a big window that looks out over a park, not the ocean. I painted the walls a bright, warm yellow. I bought myself a new bed, new sheets, new towels. It's quiet. I'm learning to be alone, not lonely, but alone, to trust my own instincts, to hear my own thoughts, without them being filtered through what Mark might think or what Chloe might say. My life, the one I had, is over. It was a lie, but the life I'm building now, it's small and it's quiet and it's real. It's all mine. Sarah and I, we still have coffee. We don't talk about them, not anymore. We talk about her daughter, who's applying to college. We talk about the garden I'm trying to grow on my tiny balcony. Last week, she brought me a housewarming gift, a small, potted plant with bright purple flowers. No lilies, she said, with a small, knowing smile. No, I said, taking it from her. The smell of fresh earth and new life filling my small kitchen. Never again. I am not the woman Mark married. I am not the woman Chloe betrayed. I don't even know who that woman was. I am Evie, and I am finally, truly, on my own. It is a terrible, terrible thing to realize the home you built was just a house of cards. You spend so much of your life building, trusting, laying one brick of faith on top of another. You trust in the feel of your husband's hand. You trust in the sound of your best friend's laugh. You believe in the life you are living, because to not believe is to be constantly, terribly alone. But I've learned there is a difference between being alone and being a fool. I looked at Mark, and I looked at Chloe, and I saw what I wanted to see. I saw love. I saw loyalty. I saw life. But the truth was always there, just underneath the surface, in that little flicker in his eyes, in the way her hug felt just a little too tight. We choose not to see it until we have no choice at all. I sit here now, in my quiet apartment, and I am truly alone, and I am not afraid. It makes me wonder how much of a life is built on love and how much is built on just agreeing not to look too closely. I want to ask you, have you ever had that feeling, that little chill up your spine that tells you something is wrong, even when everything looks right? And did you listen to it? Tell me your story. Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. If these stories If this time we share together means something to you, I ask that you support the channel, like this video, and subscribe so we can continue to find the truth and the peace that comes after the pain. Be blessed and be safe.